the Candid Sales Rep Podcast, and I'm your host, Ken Lundin. In this episode, I am incredibly fired up because, quite frankly, I've had the opportunity to know the person we're going to interview today for a long time. So I've seen what he's done, and I think you're going to get massive value out of this. So we're going to talk to Dave Steggert today because he has extensive experience in sales and strategic account management. And from what I talk to CEOs about, everybody wants more out of those big accounts. Dave's going to share his journey from how he handles complex sales cycles in SaaS to driving additional brand partnerships in content marketing. So we're super fired up that Dave's here. We're going to discuss his approach to managing customer relationships, overcoming objections. As you can see, I almost can't fit it all in. So Dave, good to see you, brother. Welcome.
Ken, always good to see you. Thanks for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome. I know that we're going to get all fired up about this, right? Because I mean, if you're not passionate about sales, I don't know what in the world we're doing. So tell us, just give us that kind of tidbit. Like, how'd you get started in this? Because I know that I didn't say that I wanted to go into sales, and that wasn't like a career profession. It wasn't like becoming a fireman when I was 7. How'd you get started?
Yeah, oddly enough, I worked in the thoroughbred racehorse breeding industry for 6 to 7 years after college, after being a finance and econ major and minor. And I was in that business, which is a bizarre business to be in, such a niche industry. Yeah. And I saw people really struggling. And I said, well, I'd be happy doing this in 10, 20, 30 years. And my gut said it was a resounding no. So I thought to myself, what industry, what role can I have where I can truly control my destiny? And lots of my friends were in sales. I talked to them and I decided I wanted to strap up the boots in the city, so to speak, and get into sales. So I did.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you started with, I wanted to figure out how to control my own destiny. So in the beginning, you had these ideas of how much control of your destiny you have, and then you now have experience. So I would ask you, what were the things that you were really excited about? And then what were some things that were unexpected that have occurred kind of in the overall journey for you?
Yeah, I was excited about the money. Number one, I think lots of people get into sales because of the ability to control their income, or at least not cap it. Yeah. So that was really, really thrilling idea to me. I also liked the idea of helping people. When you have a solution, whether it be a widget or a super multi-million complex product to sell, you're helping people. You're helping them solve problems, and I really, really liked the idea of that as well. What really surprised me was, I'd say, the amount of sales that is not art. And by that, I mean, I had this perception that a good salesperson was suave, gregarious, just had this natural innate ability to sell stuff. And when I got into sales, I thought to myself, I don't know how much of that guy I am. But then I worked with some coaches and peers, and I really learned that, hey, yes, there is art. There are innate abilities to people that make them maybe inherently good at parts of sales, but there's a huge chunk, if not sometimes the majority, depending on the person, of sales that's science-based. And I said, wait, this is amazing. Like, I don't have to just have it all in me. I can actually learn this stuff, and I can actually apply the things that I learned to being good at this craft. So that was a pleasant surprise, I'd say, for sure.
Yeah, it's awesome that you came out of that thoroughbred racing component in a totally different way, because you probably had what you're describing between the money and between the thoughts. I think it's what most people outside of sales think about salespeople. Like, they're picturing the used car sales guy in the really bad tweed jacket with the comb over, which is what I would have if I didn't shave my head. But that's a totally different gig. So ultimately, that's what you're describing. I think it's funny because our research says 49% of sellers are actually not motivated by money purely. Like, they're intrinsic, right? You like the job satisfaction. So tell me how that's transitioned. Some people still go, I'm doing it for the paycheck, and that's cool. Other people say, you know what, it's the fulfillment, the client stuff, that kind of thing. Talk to me a little bit about what motivates you to keep performing.
I think it's all personal, right? So for me, I think earlier when I was in my late 20s and I got into sales, the money was important to me because I was in my 20s, and it's something that you're thinking about as far as like, hey, what do I want to build to start a family, to start, collecting assets, to build wealth over the long term. So I definitely agree that priorities can change. And even for me, I'd say that the money has become important, but certainly not the whole pie of importance. So I think what I've really focused on, I think throughout my career, is learning and growing. And what I've learned and where I've invested in myself has changed, right? Because ideally, you're never staying in the same place. You're always, in an accretive way, adding to your knowledge base and getting better and better. I think the last couple years in my career, what I've really wanted to focus on is being as genuinely empathetic as possible. I think, when you're early in your sales career, and I'll speak strictly for myself, you're so focused on the sale, you're so focused on the outcome that it can blind you. Whether you're an SDR, BDR, or a new logo rep for the first time, you're just focused on hitting that goal and appeasing your boss and getting this money, hitting quota. But I think the really the paramount peak of sales, in my opinion, is self-actualizing yourself to the point where you're there to serve. You're there only to serve, and everything that you want, all the benefits of doing your job will follow through. There's like a trickle down effect of being truly empathetic, approaching every sales interaction and every tiny thing you do with the most deliberate intentions in service of the outcomes of your prospect or customer. And if you do that with really a clear mind and clear heart and the best intentions, I think only great things can happen. So that's where I've been really, really focusing my energy and efforts.
Yeah, that's really well said. So tell me this, this is the Candid Sales Rep Podcast. Tell me how you manage the idea. In sales, to be successful in general, I believe you have to be two things, and they seem to be diametrically opposed. You have to be confident, but then in order to grow like you have, and in order to continue to advance your career, you also have to be humble. It's a really weird question, but how do those two things interact in your world?
It's funny you asked that. When I was thinking about what the heck we're going to talk about today, this exact principle came to mind. And I honestly have been probably on the opposite side of arrogant in sales. When I came in my late 20s, I felt very insecure about getting into sales and being 6-7 years behind my counterparts. So there were folks just out of school that were getting these entry-level sales jobs. And here I was, this 29-year-old getting into sales, doing the same exact role they were, but seeing my peers already making six figures, getting promoted 2 or 3 times within their role. So I felt very insecure about being behind. So all to say, I had a bit of an imposter syndrome for my first handful of years in sales. So I didn't suffer from hey, I've got this all figured out and let me just crush it. I got into sales knowing and thinking that I had to work hard and I had to work fast. So I was hungry for all the information I could get, fail fast, screw up, which was hard, learning how to fail and learning how to kind of get punched in the mouth in sales, which you will and which you do, was really tough for me. It was kind of difficult to get through, but I think you learn how to build resilience, build grit, build skill, and get better, and just wake up and do it the next day and try to be better. I think to most directly answer your question though, I think you are much better off, regardless of if you have 2, 5, 10, or 20 years of experience in sales, with the mindset that you know nothing than you know it all. It's a mindset. Now, obviously, you can't approach a client or a prospect with the mindset that you know nothing because you'll look incompetent. I think the whole idea is to eventually get to conscious competence with the mindset that there's always something for you to learn and there's always people for you to learn from.
That's fantastic. So let's transition a little bit based upon that, because the learning is something that's continued to happen throughout your career. And you've done SaaS pretty substantially, but you've done it for different size prospects and clients. So I think one of the things that sales reps out there and the people who will be listening to this podcast, one of the things they might be asking to themselves is, a lot of people want to go, they have this desire, right? I'm selling SMB, I'm selling small market, I want to move to mid-market, or I want to move to enterprise. What do you think the biggest differences are when you move up market into larger companies on how you can consistently be in play for these complex sales cycles?
I'd say the first thing, before getting into the difference between the two mechanically and how you operate and what's the right fit, I think it's important for a sales rep to find their swim lane. And this concept was taught to me by someone you know quite well too, Randy. And Randy, who's an awesome salesperson, I think he just retired as well. Randy let me know that it's all about finding your swim lane in sales. So whether you are selling a strict commodity where you don't need to generate demand, you've got a known set of buyers and they need your widget and you sell them the widget, or you're selling a 5-year sales cycle, multi-million-dollar product. It's okay. Like, everything needs to be sold. If something has value and there's people there to buy it, there needs to be some mechanism to deliver those goods and services to the businesses and people that need it. That said, I tee that up because I think you got to find your swim lane. And whether that's selling the product to SMB, mid-market, enterprise, whatever, that's fine. The reality is, though, to your question, Ken, like, it requires very different mechanics often. So, I've sold a $30,000 marketing analytics subscription where you're kind of rarely getting to a VP or CXO to validate the value of the product. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, depending on the size of the organization you're selling to. And that changes the mechanics of how you sell and how you think about the people and the organization you're selling into. Obviously, if you are going to think about bigger deals, longer sales cycle, higher stakes, things get more complex, both internally and externally. I think when you think about preparation for bigger deals, there's a direct correlation between deal size and complexity and the amount that you're preparing for every single call. You have to think about the stakeholders, the champions, the coaches, the executive buyers, who is what currently versus what they need to be in order to advance a deal. How each one of their individual projects and what's on their plate contributes to the broader project and the strategic initiatives going on with the company. And you have to connect all of those dots while thinking about internally all the resources you need to harness together to deliver whatever solution you have. So I've worked with companies where, in content marketing, where there was kind of like a whole army of people that needed to deliver the solution to the customer because it was very human labor intensive. And then I've worked most recently with a company called Paddle, where it was a very technical sale. So I needed our solutions leads with me going through the sales process, holding the product and engineering team of our prospect in order to make sure that we're building the right solution and marrying the commercial objectives to get the sale done. But I think what was maybe the biggest learning moment for me with larger upmarket sales is the amount of scrutiny and eyeballs that comes internally with the deal. So you're almost managing internal stakeholders, maybe even more than external stakeholders with big enterprise deals. So you've got, sales leadership and leadership across the board asking for updates and wanting to be involved depending on their management style. So ultimately it ends up being a lot to manage internally, which requires a lot of organization, a lot of time, a lot of effort, but you have to be the bridge and conduit to the customer and do all of the things that you would normally do, but on a hyper scale if it's bigger. I'd say the final thing that I would think about that really kind of sticks with me, Ken, in upmarket sales is the fact that the basics almost matter more. You can kind of get away with not doing your chores as much if your pipeline is overflowing with all these deals and you've got 200% of quota within your pipeline that could close. When you're thinking about bigger deals, the risk of losing one or even some out of your pipeline has such a bigger impact on your ability to hit goal, and in some cases the company to hit goal and reach numbers, such that you can't screw up. So you got to focus on the details much, much more, in my opinion.
Yeah. So interesting enough. So for those of you out there, Dave mentioned a guy named Randy. Well, it's Randy Remersma is actually how I got my start in consulting as well. And it's how Dave and I met. So, but interestingly, what he said, Dave, and it is super germane to what you just were explaining, is this: the rigor necessary in the deal scales with the size of the deal, right? The steps matter more. And I want to move into some of the SaaS stuff, but I don't want to leave this point. If I said to you, Dave, are there 6 kind of things or 5 or 3 kind of things that you really are looking at as you're managing through an opportunity, an account? You've mentioned the champion and the executive buyer, but if you were to say these are the important things that I am looking at, what would those be?
I'd say that there are kind of cornerstones to any deal. any big deal worth investing the time in. And again, Ken, we're talking about larger upmarket deals here, not churn and burn mentality here. The first is an org chart. I use org charts religiously as a map to understand the landscape of the folks I'm selling into. And I think it's helpful because at the end of the day, we're selling to people, and where these people are coming together to make a decision to solve.
Wait, you mean buildings don't buy things?
Weird, I know, right? So we're selling to people, so that's where I start. That's kind of where I start and end things. Is what is that entire landscape, and it's got to be mapped out. And within that map, I have indicators to understand how each person fits into that network, the function, and then the organization. And that guides all of my conversations internally when I'm talking to executives about where we are within a deal, and particularly planning with the core team about what we need to do next. It's always the people. It's always what they care about. It's always what they care about rolling up to the strategic initiatives that you're trying to influence. On top of the org.
Yeah, and I love that you say what they're rolling up. Go ahead.
No, you're right. You can put 5 stars next to that because that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, you got to move past the tactical need and move into something that actually people are willing to put money into. So that's awesome. Well, you've had a ton of time around SaaS. So let's transition just a little bit. I mean, germane and relevant, but I'm curious with, we've had an interesting 3, 4, 5-year run in SaaS, to be honest, right? We had COVID. Everybody thought the world was coming to an end. We had the artificial technology boom where Google, Facebook, and everybody was hiring everybody on the street and driving costs up to little guys. And then we had all the layoffs come, and we have buyers slow. There's a lot of stuff. How do you keep up with that, what's going on around the world of SaaS, and keep your head in the game so that you can be the most successful version of you?
It's getting harder, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's getting harder. There's a lot of change, and it feels like it's exponentially occurring. I think that you gotta figure out what you can control versus what you can't. I think you also have to understand within the change, is it changing the overall industry? Are the changes just impacting your company? Is the change impacting specific functions within your company? And then understanding really how you can mitigate or evolve to meet those changes. And I'll give you an example. I think something that has really changed my role as a sales rep is the amount of information that buyers have today. Not only is there, an increasing amount of product-led growth, self-serve sales, but and less so upmarket, of course, but buyers just want to consume information on their own. They want to be very educated before they interact with the sales rep. And this is not new, right? This has been going on for a while now. But I think what this means is that when you're showing up to even an initial sales call, you've got really smart buyers, and they know what they want. They think they know what they want, let's say. They have often a problem that they know they need solved, or they think they might need solved, or some combination of that, or somewhere on that spectrum. And it means that you need to show up prepared. It kind of comes back to the basics, right? You need to do the preparation to understand who you're talking to. You need to have questions prepared that are what, why, how, why not type of questions, that are open-ended questions, that are thought-provoking. And you need to do your research such that you're not showing up to a call asking questions that you could have Googled prior. Ken, this might all sound like yeah, duh, so what? But my point
No.
is,
There's nothing you're saying that sounds like yeah, duh, because we us. We work with hundreds and thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds and thousands of reps. And man, it happens every day. People show up with the stuff that they should have seen on somebody's LinkedIn profile or the post they just made.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think what I'm getting to, and I'm kind of belaboring the point, is that the differentiator in that interaction in the sales is you. It is the sales rep. There's so many solutions out there. Buyers are overwhelmed. They think everything looks the same. Often there is a lot of overlap with functionality. They're really, really smart people often, but they don't know your world. You know your world. So you have to be prepared. You have to show up empathetic, asking the right questions, really being an advocate for them. And I think quite often you as the rep will be the distinguishing factor. So I take comfort in that. The changes in the market scare the crap out of me a lot because I can't control that. And one day AI is going to take over all of our jobs eventually. But until then, I'm going to do my best to differentiate by being a really curious, empathetic advocate for them.
Well, I think what you've done is teed up our next 7 episodes because there was so much to unpack there. So let's go into the kind of one of the things that I heard you say, because we could talk about individual accountability. We could talk about AI. We could talk about the sales rep being the difference in the deal. Tell me a little bit about that. How do you separate the idea between, well, these are things that are within my control, and these are things that are, informational that I'm going to be aware of, but I can't put my focus there because I can't do anything about it now?
Do you mean deal specific?
No, just let's talk in sales specific.
What you've asked was really hard for me to accept throughout my sales career, especially early on, right? You want to control everything. I think the reality is that at the beginning of every deal, you need to have the mindset that you have a 0% chance of closing it. Yeah. Whether it's an inbound, known need, seemingly really great product market fit, a current customer knocking on your door, if you're Salesforce saying, I need 1,000 more CRM licenses, which might be one of the easiest sales in the world. I don't know. Or if it's an outbound and you've got a CXO, your BDR got a CXO on a phone and they're like, I don't need you, but I'll take the call. I think you need to approach every single initial sales interaction with that 0% mentality. And you need to do everything and anything you need to do in order to, as quickly as possible, get that from 0 to 100%. As you go through that, I think you need, understanding your company and understanding product market fit, what your ICP is, where you lose, where you tend to lose versus where you always lose, because that's quite different. And kind of adding those things up along the way to understand where you're going to succeed is going to be your best friend. The things you can control and can't control are going to be unique for everybody, but I would recommend and encourage everyone to have very candid conversations with their boss and with their team in a healthy way and understand, hey, what does a really good customer for us look like? What does a bad customer for us look like? And obviously balance that with the goals and revenue numbers the company needs to thrive and move forward. But I think it's all about very deliberately understanding where you win, and then, to your point, understanding what you can and can't control and focusing on what you can and trying to just get past what you can't. And if what you can't control will kill you, maybe it's not the right customer for you. Maybe it's not the right opportunity, or maybe it's not the right sales opportunity for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things, as somebody who's actively learning and doing it intentionally in a way where you're absorbing the stuff, and what I've always liked about our relationship is that I've seen you actually apply the things you're learning. It's very different to, go read a Tom Clancy novel versus building a submarine. So those are completely different ideas. And I can tell you as an example, it's well known out in the public sphere, I had to file bankruptcy in 2011, and there were a boatload of lessons over the last 13 years that have come from that experience. So talk to me about, as you've gone through your career, reflect a little bit. What are some of the lessons that you've learned throughout your career that make you who you are today?
I think the biggest lesson comes back to probably being easy on yourself. I was very hard on myself when I made a career transition in my late 20s. I beat myself up for being behind or thinking I was behind. And the reality is, and this is really just a life lesson, not just a sales lesson, but what we think becomes our reality. So I think you really have to focus on the ideas and the thoughts going around in your head, and very deliberately try to understand and sort those ideas out in a way that's fair and kind to yourself. So I think a more mature me educating and giving advice to a younger me would have been, slow down, take a step back. You're exactly where you need to be if this is what you want. Be eager, be open to learn, and be genuine about that, and it will all fall into place. And I think you just have to want sales, right? Like, sales is not easy. This is not a profession for the faint of heart. So you have to be wanting to be an athlete and work hard and fail and do it over and over and over again. And you really should try to do that with the mindset that everything's going to be okay, because it is, because we're talking about sales. This isn't life or death scenarios often.
So I love that, because one of my, kind of core beliefs is that in sales so often, because we're one of the only positions in a company that's judged purely by a specific one analytic, right? That there's a lot of pressure, and there's the internal and external stakeholders. And a lot of times I think sellers give up who they are as a person to some extent, and they don't make time to be healthy as a human. So how do you go about managing that, where you know that you've got a way to take a mental break? And I don't think it's about work-life balance, because nothing's ever 50-50. There are days and weeks I'm 80-20 business, and then there are days and weeks that I'm 70-30 personal. But it's more about the idea of how do you mentally approach just making sure that you take care of you, because a healthy you is better for the organization too.
100%. I'd say, first of all, there are a lot of different types of sales organizations and cultures and businesses and products to sell. I think, again, finding your swim lane is really, really important. There are bad environments. There are mismatches for people in sales roles in organizations all the time. I, at times, have been part of that, just for a variety of reasons. I think we all can relate to that. I think you need to, if you're confident you're in the right role, in the right company, selling the right thing, I think it's all about doing the little things that make you whole. So for me, that is, it's going to sound a bit cliche, and I feel like we're all talking about it to some degree, but sleeping well, exercising, putting good food in my mouth, spending time with people that I really care about. Like these are things that I think a lot of people do every single day. But I think the reality is, for me at least, is that those are the things that make the counterbalance to work fulfilling and allow me to show up to work in a way where I'm rejuvenated. I can put my best foot forward and really help contribute to the goals of the company.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we can't get tired of talking about is the foundational things. And I love what you said, because those are truly the foundations. And it goes back to kind of what the question started with, which was, hey, people are giving up certain things in order to meet the career demands they've put on themselves, or their organization has. And what you're saying is, well, hey, if I start with these things, well, then I can do all the other stuff too. And that seems incredibly healthy. So I absolutely love that. Let's talk for just a second. I want to transition kind of back into the business world, but you're really great at using value-led sales. So tell me about that. I mean, what does that mean to you, and what's your approach when it comes to value-based selling?
I've said it a few times in the last 30 minutes or so, but
it must be important then. So that's the good news.
It must be.
We like repeatable things being important.
I think it comes back to empathy, and so much branches off from empathy. And to me, value-based selling has to stem from curiosity, and that curiosity needs to be aimed at truly understanding what you're trying to solve. And again, all of this comes down to preparation and asking the right questions, and through the right discovery and conversation, really understanding what you're trying to solve. Obviously, you need to sell something that is of strategic value in the first place, and there's a whole totem pole, if you will, and all of it's necessary. All of these solutions are in the market for a reason. No judgment there, but there's going to be different impact on the organization depending on what you're selling. All said, you need to figure out, like, really realistically what that is, what the actual value is of the product you're selling, and just aim to figure that out as quickly as possible for your prospect, and go about that in a manner that is understanding and attaching what each individual in the organization cares about, and how what they're doing every day rolls up to the goals of that function, and then the initiatives that business is trying to solve for. And I think everything you do really has to come back to those things. So once you've uncovered what those initiatives are, ideally your product can help achieve part or whole or all of what that initiative or initiatives are. And then I think you need to map out every single thing that you need to do to help win and solve that problem. And just keep in mind through every interaction internally and externally that's what you're doing. I like to approach every call with a pretty simple framework. And that framework is, what are the three things that the customer or prospect should gain from this interaction? What are the three things that I and my team need to gain from this interaction? And what are the ideal next steps that we have coming out of this next interaction? And that first step, like what should the customer gain? That needs to be well thought out every single time, and it needs to come back to the project plan. It needs to come back to what you're ultimately trying to solve for. I think if you use that as a compass, Ken, I think you can't get lost, or you'll minimize the chances of getting lost, at least. Let's say that.
That's fantastic. So now I'm going to ask you, as we're getting towards the end of this interview, I'm going to ask you the toughest question that I've asked you. And it actually will, I don't think it'll be that tough, but it is actually a really deep and insightful question, because you've talked about empathy, and I couldn't agree with you more, right? You have to be empathetic to what's going on in other people's worlds. That's very different than sympathetic. But tell me this. So the one thing I want to make sure that we get clear for people out there who are going to watch this is, some people may struggle because they think they're empathetic, but they're sympathetic, or they're empathetic, but they don't close because I just understand everybody's thing. I don't understand that. So tell me how you think about balancing the idea of being empathetic to a client and still providing the level of success that you need to for you personally as well as your company.
Well, you're not there just to understand a problem. There's got to be action. So if there's not an action plan, then something's fundamentally very wrong, right? I'd say that, at least for me, the empathy mindset is helpful because it provides understanding. I can't propose a solution unless I understand what the ultimate goal is. And my whole point about empathy is that allows me to understand all the dynamics of individuals and what they care about and how that connects to broader goals and what the company cares about. But like I mentioned with what are the ideal next steps of every interaction, those need to be aimed at getting to the ultimate goal of closing the deal, as long as it's the right fit. And as long as it's if that's your goal as a sales rep, and that's what the customer ultimately wants, to solve a problem that you can ideally solve with your product or solution, there has to be action. So I don't mean to simplify the response, but I would say that empathy without action is just a lack of doing your job in some ways.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, Seggs, I appreciate you coming on. So we've talked about so much, but as you reflect back, and there may not be, but as you reflect back, is there anything where you're like, man, I wish he would have asked me? Or is there anything else you want to say in kind of closing words as we finish out the episode?
You know what? You've been in sales longer than me. What's the biggest? It's a two-part question. What is the biggest lesson that you learned a long time ago that still applies today as like a golden rule? And what's a lesson that you learned a while ago that you've probably changed your mind about since time and knowledge?
See, I didn't know you were going to flip it on me. I thought you were going to say something fantastic about you and the world at large. But this is exactly why you've always crushed it when it comes to actually working with prospects and clients, because it's a thoughtful, insightful question. So I'd say a couple things. Something I've gotten back to recently. So the first thing is that there is typically no more than, say, 3 core components and things that you need to be doing to be successful every single day. So for us, as an example at Revy, one of those things has been every single day we have to have actionable things about building pipeline. So there's always some prospecting and marketing motions going on. Because in my industry, oftentimes we can say, oh, we're busy with clients, and we put prospecting to the side. But it's very much like a sales rep, right? Oh, I'm busy trying to win a deal. So I'll prospect later because this is a $5 million deal. Oh, yeah, but it's also, like you said earlier, a massive risk if you lose it and you're not doing and. So I think I'm finally listening to my own advice, which is prospecting and everything else is what the elite do. Prospecting or everything else, well, you can figure out what the problem is. So I think that's first. I think second, much like you, the transition and moving through sales, and thank you for calling out the fact that I'm substantially older than you. So
you just said substantially, not me.
Well, I did refer that I could have the comb over if I would let this grow out. God, can you imagine how bad I'd look? So I think the thing that I've probably changed my mind most on, like you, are a couple things. So one is you cannot manufacture urgency. Right? Early on in my career, people were like, hey, give them a discount and they'll close. And I didn't realize until much later that, no, that's not actually true, because we can help them create their own urgency. But if we're closing them because we're lowering the price, they're probably actually not going to be the world's greatest client, because we've already indicated the idea that we were overcharging at the beginning so that we can discount it today. So I think that was one of the pieces, was going through that. And then I think the second one was balancing that idea, like you talked about, of how do we truly become client-centric and consultative? I fall into it in ebbs and flows, just selling what we do today, even, where it's like, hey, we want to sell a widget. We want to sell a thing. Hey, I want to sell you my RevHeat Academy. Hey, I want to sell you this. And the truth of the matter is, none of that stuff matters unless the client actually has a problem that those things directly apply to. So when we work with SaaS companies, like you've been around for a lot, we walk in, and I'm going to tell you, 75% of the people are saying, hey, we've got this cool PDF report, and it's better looking than yours, and it'll be $50,000 to change. Here's what I know. No buyer wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to spend $50,000 on a prettier PDF. So I think those are a couple things. And then clearly over a bourbon, a beer, or wine, I could probably rant on those subjects for about 122 years. Did that answer it, or did that create your follow-up?
Hey, it's your answer. No, that's insightful. Thank you.
I love that. And it's perfect too, because that's the way you approach clients, right? It's their answer, because what we know is it's more important that they say it than we think it. So that's awesome. So I cannot thank you enough. So Dave Steggert, everybody, fantastic strategic account manager, salesperson. You can see just by listening to him that there's about 27 different nuggets, and I hope that you wrote down at least one that you can help influence your sales career. So Dave, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining the Candid Sales Rep Podcast. I'm Ken Lundin. We're out of here.
Thanks, Ken.